Hey everybody, this is John Leon Guerrero. Our guest today, Duncan Williams, is a rolling good time. He's a psychoacoustician and a researcher in the digital creativity labs at the University of York. He was a research fellow in music with artificial intelligence and the music technology officer at Oxford. His work and his insight on the way the brain reacts to vibrations, sounds, and frequency is fascinating, and he leads the way into our ability to enhance creativity and performance with the optical acoustic environment. Besides that, we met him at NAMM 2019, and he was the best man at our friend Wes Mabey, the Wesinator's wedding. And if you spend 5 minutes with Duncan, you'd have him be your best man too. He's currently traveling the world on a research project. He was in the Bay Area when we recorded this episode, and as of the date of its publishing, I believe he's en route from Tokyo to Hong Kong. And he is a jiu-jitsu practitioner who finds a place to roll in every city he visits, so he literally is a rolling good time, and you're going to love him. Here's Duncan Williams.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Cruz.
This is Bryce Vine.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Daryl Ames.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Duncan Williams, and you're listening to the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Oh, yes, you are. Duncan Williams is, his field of study is very interesting to us. It is psychoacoustics. Is that correct?
What?
Right, yes, psychoacoustics.
Which means that you are studying the effects of brain waves based on sounds that come toward a person.
That's
that true?
definitely a part of it. So,
Okay.
psychoacoustics pretty much falls into two camps. I usually say that I'm interested in what happens in our brains when we hear sounds.
Okay.
And so by extension, not just our brains, but all of our central and peripheral nervous systems. So what I mean by that is if you hear a bit of music and it gives you chills or tingles, or it reminds you of a place, or it incites a certain emotional state, what's really happening? And that can also happen with other perceptual sciences. So in the world of smell, people might be interested in the smell of cut grass or some burning logs, and they give us memories and experiences that are kind of difficult to get a handle on.
Well, let me ask you this, because I think that all of these courses of study are pretty important and fascinating. I would say I am weighted towards sound.
Sure,
and I imagine
me
you
too.
are too.
Absolutely.
So is that a personality trait that some people are more smell related or more sensitive to smell than sound than other people?
Usually, if you ask people what sense they would most be willing to lose, sight is their number one priority. But some people will say, look, I can't live without my hearing. I will keep that over any other sense of my perceptual senses. So, we've got sight, smell, taste, touch, and sound, pretty much. So sound, for many people, tends to be a second-class citizen, if that makes sense. So if you work in film or TV or games is a great example because the sound designer for video games will be pretty much the last part of the chain, given the least amount of storage on the project, the smallest budget. But if you try and watch a big Hollywood film, the favourite that I always choose is Casino Royale, Daniel Craig's Bond.
Yeah.
And you watch that thing with it on mute, it's the most boring film imaginable.
Oh, absolutely.
Even though it's got loads of great action sequences in it, and it's kind of quite an exciting film in a lot of regards, loads of quick cuts. Watch it on mute and it sucks.
But a lot of what happens in those quick cuts is jarring.
Yeah.
And a lot of the jarring happens in that subwoofer.
Yeah, for sure. And so there's ways that once we understand how sound influences our perception of things, ways that we can manipulate those. So bass is a great example, or huge dynamic range, which is easy to get in the cinema, not so easy to get if you're compressing your audio and sending it over a streaming platform. So there are compromises, and it depends where you want to draw compromises. So there are practical applications to psychoacoustics. A famous one is MP3 compression. So
right. So if I'm hearing this correctly, or maybe I'm hearing this with a bias, but what I'm hearing is that the quality of the sound you hear also affects your emotions, just like anything else. I mean, if you're looking at a beautiful painting, it's going to light you up a whole lot more if you're looking at it live and in person, than if you're looking at a photograph of it.
So the psychoacoustics example of that would be that you're looking at a digital version of that painting now, and it's quite pixelated. It's been heavily compressed, and really MP3 compression works by trying to use the minimum perceptible amount of compression. So what amount of the data can you chuck away before it ruins the quality of the experience for you? And if you hear badly compressed MP3s from the late 90s and whatever, then they do suck pretty much. They do kind of ruin it. And there's a big, portion of just waving your good wife there, I think. She says, it's to do with sound quality. Another sort of part of psychoacoustics that I don't really get into is to do with hearing aid improvement. So the quality of an experience for someone that's had some degradation in their hearing, perhaps from damage if they've worked in live music or around shooting or
done 1,000 combat missions.
Right.
Like
so and that's going to have a serious impact on your hearing. You might get away with that if you're lucky, but those are big problems. And one of the things
this is really important, but Pete didn't hear a word you just said.
What are you guys are talking? Yeah. No, it's serious. Duncan, you're right. I mean, I've got, like John said, I've got 1,000 combat missions, and my ears never stop ringing, and there's multiple tones, and my hearing aids are changing my life in terms of being able to blast that ringing back, and then also let me hear a whole. I must not have half of the consonants in my right ear, like they're just gone.
Yeah, and so I mean that's a terrible thing, really, especially if you're. I mean, even if you're not really into music and sound, one of the things that we use sound for as humans is humans aren't very adaptable to solo existence. So we rely on each other to share labor, and we do that by communicating, and we do that by speaking and other forms of communication, non-verbal communication. I think the actual content of the words is probably only like 10%. But the way that you say it and deliver it is really important. And if you start to lose that, I think with sound, what people don't realize is that when it's gone, they notice that it's gone. But until it's gone, they kind of take it for granted.
Right. And that's not in a conscious way.
Yeah.
It's we don't notice that it's not gone.
Yeah, I mean, there are neural pathways that are very correlated with, particularly, for example, speech perception and decoding. There's a really good bit of research that's just come out where people have taken some fMRI scans, which are essentially to do with how much blood is flowing around regions of the brain.
Okay.
And they're able to tell which letter or number, between a choice of about 60 or 70 characters, people are thinking of, and then send that to a vocoder, to a speech synthesizer. So if you imagine a patient that has some damage in their vocal cords, for example, they might be able to use that to have a voice by thinking of the words in the future.
Wow.
Which is really cool.
That is really cool. That's spectacular. Yeah. When you mentioned that people who get to choose, if you have to lose a sense, and you're able to choose which one. Pete, which one would you choose?
Boy, it's a hard question. Maybe smell is the one I think that I use the least, maybe.
So the problem with smell is that because we've only got kind of... I'm not a food scientist, but psychoacoustics borrowed a lot from food science in the 70s when people were putting money into figuring out which kind of chocolate and wine people would buy the most of. There's, I think, 5 different kind of taste sensations, umami and sweet, sour and bitter and sugar. So most of the work that happens when you eat food is done by your nose. And if you held your nose and ate a shaved potato versus a shaved apple, the texture and the rest of it is so similar that you wouldn't be able to taste the difference. So if you lose smell, then all of that fun you have at the barbecue and all of the other taste sensations every time you sit down to eat for food that isn't just like a protein shake for functional purpose is gone. And so a big part of pleasure of life is knocked out. So I'm sorry to tell you, Pete, but I think you've made a bad choice.
Hey, Pete, what I heard was you and I wouldn't be so fucking fat.
That's what I was thinking.
All right, so smell it is. Anyway, back to your course of study.
Okay.
In the fascinating world of psychoacoustics, you came there, though, because you have a background in sound engineering.
Right, yeah. So when I was a teenager, I was sort of first introduced to reel-to-reel tape recording, which I guess you guys will be familiar with, but perhaps some of your listeners might not be. So we're talking about 2-inch analog tape, cutting it with a razor blade, sticking it together, old school recording. And there was a recording studio very near to my house that happened to be a successful one. I was a teenage metalhead, and there was a band there playing, a British band called Napalm Death.
Oh, yeah.
And these guys were famous for holding the Guinness World Record for the shortest song. So it's about 2 seconds of... anyway, so teenage Duncan was really interested in this, and went over there and basically became the T-boy, which they glamorously call the assistant engineer.
All right.
in sound.
That is a glamorous name for T-boy.
So, but really it means making a lot of tea, cleaning the swimming pool, mowing the lawn, these kinds of menial jobs. And then the payoff is that you're around musicians and you start to learn how sound engineering works from an old school point of view.
Hey, you know what you call a
in
guy
places.
who hangs around with musicians?
Groupie.
The drummer.
No,
Anyway.
And so I became really sort of fascinated with what happens to the sound when it comes back off the tape.
Yeah.
And how it's so different to the way that the sound was in the room. And if you move a mic like half an inch one way or half an inch another, or change the mic out, how it can really change everything.
The subtleties of the recording process.
Yeah, and that intrigued me.
This is one of the things that escape the teenage metalhead until you get exposed to that and you go, wow, there's a whole lot of technique happening.
Man,
here.
some of those metal projects, the detail in the engineering is insane.
I mean, they're pushing a lot of limits.
Yeah, everything's up to 11.
And when you have everything up to 11, this is for our listeners, if you have everything up to 11, you have to find your subtleties elsewhere.
Right.
And so that calls upon the band, for one, and really a lot the engineer to really find those places. Because when everything's up to 11, your ears get fatigued.
Yeah.
And the last thing you need to do to your listener is do something to them that gets them uninvolved.
And there was a big thing around that time of the loudness war happening as well. So when every record was getting louder and louder and louder.
Yeah.
I don't know which record kicked that off. I think it might be the Metallica Black Album in 91. But
well, that was one of them. But in hip-hop, there was a lot going on, too.
Yeah.
There was a loudness war in hip-hop at the same time.
Yeah.
They were correlated. And in the two worlds, they were slightly different because you did want that hard, heavy chunk, in metal. In hip-hop, you wanted to really get the most out of your 808. Yeah. You wanted that low rumble, the boom, and you wanted to shake the trunk.
There's a problem. I mean, I'm not a mastering engineer, but when I've talked to mastering engineers about it, I think there's an issue with if you've got a very dense guitar-heavy mix with layers and layers of guitar stacked over each other, there's no room. So in order to make things sound loud, you actually kind of need to do the inverse, which is make more dynamic range rather than squeezing it out. So if you've got some very
almost
minimal
like creating
hip-hop,
a vacuum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you've got some minimal hip-hop track, you can actually crank that to seem much louder. So there's a lot that goes into it, and it was a very detailed, steep learning curve. So I worked as a muso and a sound engineer, moved to London in, I think, 2003 or something like that.
Okay.
And was working there.
You weren't in London. Where were you?
So the studio was called Jacobs, which is in Farnham, Surrey. They closed the year after I left.
Ah, see?
And that was all...
You were the magic.
No, I mean, I did. It was following the standard sort of career path at that point, but a lot of.
I'd heard of. I'm not pulling your chain. I'd heard of Farnham Studios.
Yeah, it was a big place. I mean, it had a Neve VR, an SSLG, a swimming pool, a mansion house. It was one of those places where they'd send.
Slow down for the listener. So there was a Neve console in there,
a Neve and an SSL,
and an SSL,
which is pretty rare.
Each one of those would be the centerpiece of any studio.
Yeah.
So typically, a good-sized studio campus will have 2, maybe 3 studios.
Yeah.
You get Studio A, which is where you put your big acts, and then your acts that are in development will be in Studio B and C. And when you've got an act in Studio A, you put them in there with the SSL or the Neve.
Yeah.
When a studio's got both, that's really saying something.
That was, so it was a high-end place.
Yeah,
and, it was
and
the
not
place
just high-end. So think of this, listener, as your... you show up and you're at an airport and you're going to catch a private plane to somewhere, because this is really what the equivalent is.
Yeah.
Would you like to take the G4 or would you like to take the Falcon? And it's really a matter of personal preference, but so much at the high end in either case.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, I mean, producers would have a preference for which console.
Right.
Just some guys. I mean, I think my take on it was always that the Neve VR had a cleaner kind of signal. It sounded nicer, but the actual workflow on the SSL was really
a little smoother.
Yeah, more logical, easier to use. But the point about the whole place was that you had both. Pretty rare for a studio in the UK to have both in one place.
And a swimming pool.
And in the countryside.
Yeah.
So if you had a young band that you didn't want to put in London at Townhouse or I don't know, Strong Room or some other big if you Google Jacobs Studios, it'll come up. It wasn't Farnham, but it's
Jacobs.
Yeah.
When you're on your journey and you're trying to get all this figured out, at some point you realize you've got an academic path, and that's significant. And then you're not like, I'm going to be a real doctor. You're going to be a doctor of this sort of, I won't call it obscure, but this is not a mainstream. Oh yeah, you can totally make money doing this kind of discipline.
So there's a slightly longer-winded version of the story to that, Pete, which is that. So when I moved to London, I was doing quite well, and there's the pool. John's just found the pool, now closed. Yeah, sorry, distracted. I was doing a lot of records for a small label called Naxos, who are a European label that basically do cheap classical recordings and chuck them out on CD. And they owed me money for about 20 albums, and I was paying, quite a lot of money to live in central London at this point. And it was starting to get difficult to afford to live. So I wanted to get married and not be home late, and was ending up selling off this expensive equipment, expensive microphones and valve compressors and things that I'd acquired over the years, like all sound engineers do, because when you find a toy that you think this is part of my sound, I really need this toy, you kind of keep it and you travel around with it. So I was selling all this stuff off. And at that point, I really kind of thought, am I allowed to swear on the show?
Fire away,
okay.
Sir.
I really thought, fuck, this is ridiculous. I can't pay my rent because of this stuff. I'm going to go back to school. And went back and did a PhD in sound recording, essentially, because it was the only thing I could do. So I had no other skills other than knowing how to press record and knowing how to tweak an EQ and knowing how to talk to musicians, I guess, was another big thing. So being out socialized in that kind of way is one of the biggest things of that kind of work. And it took me a long time to get up to speed with the physics and the process of writing. And I wouldn't say I'm a good academic now, but I definitely wasn't a good academic then. It took 6 years for me to get through the process. And then my first job after that basically was 3 years at Oxford University at the music department. So I kind of fell on my feet, I guess. And it was more luck than skill. And weirdly, my friend there had been at Jacobs Studios himself as an artist at the same sort of time. He'd been signed to Atlantic Records, and 3 times actually. So and we're still friends now, and we write music and stuff together. So that was the journey really to being an academic. So I'm not really a good academic. I'm more of a kind of chancer that that fell into it by accident.
He found a great niche for himself.
Exactly.
You know, I want to first point out what just happened. This is Pete going, "Okay, you motherfuckers, bring it in. Let's reel it in a little bit.
Yep.
You're kind of geeking out on us." Absolutely, we try to do that for each other. But the other thing is that your course of study and your ability to find it when you stumbled into it the way that you did is great, and it's fascinating. We want our listeners to take example.
Okay.
Because you don't necessarily have to be the egghead, because you are clearly not the egghead.
Well, that's kind of you.
Yeah, and you don't have to be the egghead to turn out to be an expert in a field of study.
That's true. So what I did when I started looking around for a place was I looked for what, in my opinion, and in the music industry, in the UK's opinion at the time, were the best places to go. So the place I went has a famous course called the Tonmeister course in sound engineering. And they actually had an SSL in their university. Mm-hmm. So they had serious equipment, and I understood the equipment, and I had to work quite hard to get them to open the door. Yeah. When I first started kind of cold calling them and saying, "Look, I've been working in industry, this is what I want to do," they pretty much didn't want to see me, and I had to repeatedly kick the door in until I finally got an interview, finally got accepted, then had to find the money to do it.
Wow.
Got some sponsorship for the first couple of years. And so what I'd say to people is that it's about persistence and stamina rather than intelligence or academic achievement in any regards.
This is a theme in the Break It Down show. Mm-hmm. We have heard more often, overwhelmingly more often, in every variety. I mean, you've witnessed the variety of guests that we have on, from all walks of life, and I can guarantee that 95% of the folks that we've talked to, and I can't even imagine who the other 5% are, but really the recurring catalyst for achievement is stamina and persistence.
I would stand by that, and I think that's borne out. I mean, there are some people that are just really great natural talents,
have amazing gifts. That's for sure.
But I'm not one of them, and I think most of the people that I know that I look up to, that I think have done well in both academically or in sound more broadly, have just put themselves through the mill. You know, they've done the getting home at 4 o'clock in the morning and then getting back up at 7 in the morning and going out and doing the whole thing over and over again. When I was doing the PhD, oftentimes my girlfriend at the time would come back into the flat and she'd find me at 6 o'clock in the morning and I hadn't gone to sleep and I just worked through the night, trying to solve these stupid math problems, and then I'd have some coffee and go to work in the day and then
start all over again.
So I did a bunch of days that were like 40-hour days over that time. You know.
I want to jump in and ask you, when it comes to, because the other portion of the other portion of our guests, I would say, is if it wasn't through that persistence and everything else, they were compelled. I have to do this. So really the work is almost secondary for them because there's no other choice. It's what they are. That's
it's breathing in and out. Yeah. Yeah.
That's just what they do. So the work is just like that. This is how you do this.
I think that's really cool. I don't personally feel like that.
You've got to force it a little harder than that.
Yeah, I don't feel that. I don't feel that it's because I'm driven to do it, but I think saying that I have no choice makes kind of more sense because there is nothing else I could reasonably do. I mean, I can wire a house. I know my way around electrical installations, but there's pretty much not a lot else. I've got very little sort of natural abilities. I wasn't a sporty kid at school or anything like that, so I would struggle to do anything other than what I'm doing at this point in time. And so I try to make it fun for myself as much as possible, and I do have a lot of fun. You know, I'm having a great time at the moment touring your fair country at Her Majesty's pleasure. So it's oh no, actually that means a different thing in the UK. If anyone listens,
what does that mean exactly?
That would mean that you're doing bird time. You're in prison
at Her Majesty's pleasure. Interesting, very interesting. We get a lot of guys who've done that too somehow.
Yeah.
Anyway, I will say in return that one of the things that I like with you and Wes is that you speak a version of English that I wish I could that has an eloquence I wish I could match.
So we haven't mentioned Wes on this take, I don't think. So one of the things about that backstory was that Wes, our mutual friend, was a friend working in the music industry in London at the same time as I was.
Is that how you met?
Yeah. So he stuck with it and has gone on to be very successful, whereas I bailed and went to academia. But I was...
That's one approach.
And he introduced us at the NAMMShow in Anaheim last week, right?
Yeah.
So at least now people will know the context, I guess. And he does speak a very interesting English because he's Belgian and he speaks like 4 languages or more.
Uh-huh.
And what's interesting about accents to me is that they're kind of, if you pay attention to them, they're like a roadmap of where you've been.
Yeah.
Because we use speech to communicate with other people.
Right.
I think it's quite natural to adjust your accent so that the person you're talking to can understand what the heck you're saying.
We all do some degree of mirroring.
Yeah, exactly. And he does it to the nth degree. So when we were in Anaheim, he was talking to me what sounded like a very American accented English whenever he was talking to anyone else.
Right.
And then when he talks to me, he talks quite a posh Middle English. And if he's but what he told me was that he can't do a Belgian accented version of English because he's married to an English woman.
So he cannot.
He can do a Dutch version, which sounds like a stereotypical, like a Mike Myers, in very sort of hammy Dutch accented English, but pretty accurate, to be fair.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the accents, it's the colloquialisms.
Yeah.
We use a different set of colloquialisms, too. Pete doesn't go too far from right where he is dead center, I would say. What do you think, Pete? Does your speech adjust? I know mine does. Mine adjusts wildly.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting thing. And I don't. In the UK, people are often very proud of their regional dialects.
Sure.
And I think that's cool. You know, there's heritage in there and everything else. But
yeah.
I also wish people would see it for what it is, which is a way of reaching out to the other person and creating an interaction for your mutual survival.
Yeah.
Before the mammoth comes around the corner and stomps you both.
Yes, that's absolutely true. For the mutual survival before the mammoth comes around the corner, or, some other more modern equivalent to, I got to get this guy to realize that we're on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. And more often than not, we are all on the same page because everyone has the same kind of basic driving things.
I don't see Pete do that too often, though. Pete has a lane that he's right down the middle of. Would you say that, Pete, or do you make adjustments?
I stay in the middle for the most part, but I do when I do use some kind of an accent, it's to accent the actual thing I'm saying. So maybe I say waffle like right down the middle of the nation. But if I want to say something, I might say y'all because I think y'all is a useful word instead of saying folks or whatever. And then I collect certain things, especially like from English. I saw The Favorite the other day, and I just love saying
great movie.
Quite.
Really enjoyed it.
Quite. I think that's just such a great way to say something.
Yeah,
and it has a whole duality of meaning.
It does. There's a little condescending tone. There's a little. You can color it differently.
Indeed, yeah. It could be. Totally agree with you. Quite, or it could be quite. It's a great word.
You can exude a little bit of, and these are all auditory cues that we pick up.
Yeah.
I mean, I have one more I want to add in. I want to add in one more too, because in America you can't say this, but you can say it in England. So if I say the word cunt or coont, and I think we talked about this at NAMM. If I use the Scottish or the Irish thing, I can say the word cunt openly, and no one gets offended just because of the accent that I bring into it. So I think that's how I use language to communicate.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've noticed in America that on the States that I can get away with saying some pretty outrageous things.
Right.
But because I do it in this sort of stiff Brit way, they don't quite necessarily know whether I'm joking or whether it's just okay culturally where I'm from, which it wouldn't be. Although there's a place in the North York moors, not far from where I live, where it's absolutely fine just generally to say cunt because it's to do with a young baby cow process in the farming community. And cunt's still slightly offensive to most British people. I think most people would agree it's the worst word we've got. Although there are words that I wouldn't say, whereas I quite happily call someone a cunt.
Yeah.
And Australians will say, "Oh, he's a good cunt," as though that's a nice, flattering thing.
I just want to point out that you can, in the Motion Picture Association of America guidelines, say the word fuck one time in a movie and still get a PG-13 rating.
The kids
We
have got to
so
learn.
far said the word fuck one time prior to this statement.
But
we've said the word cunt about 31 times. So I think we're done.
We have to NSFW the podcast.
Yeah. Well, yeah, get in line. I was born on Guam. This episode of the Break It Down Show is brought to you by Lions Rock Productions.
That's us.
We publish, evaluate, and develop podcasts just like this one, consult others to build their own, and create associated content and content marketing strategies.
So if you're launching or expanding your social media presence, your business or your personal brand, or if you just want to take your media presence to the next level,
Reach out to us on Twitter
at PhD Turner,
or at JohnLG69.
at the Break It Down Show.
There's 1,000 ways to get a hold of us.
Now enjoy the show.
I was born on Guam, and we have a very unique accent as well.
Yeah.
But I left there when I was 5.
Okay.
And I moved to Vallejo, California, which is a town that breeds rappers and football players.
Beautiful town up here in the hills. It's
and
amazing.
I grew up in a black neighborhood.
Yeah.
So the swings in my tone are unconscious, but I do hear them, and I know that they're wild swings. They go pretty far in directions, like Wes.
Yeah.
Subtleties also, and this is one of the things where when you talk to Wes, if he's doing a British versus Belgian versus tone, there's also within the Belgian tone, there's from this part of Belgium or that part of Belgium, and there are those things all over the place. When we hear those auditory cues, is it like smelling, like the pillow at grandma's house?
I think what you notice is that if somebody recognizes an accent, there's this little moment where, and especially if it's an accent from their hometown, for example,
Yes.
there's this little moment where their ears will prick up, a light will kind of come on behind their eyes, and they'll turn around. I mean, in the States, it happens to me quite a lot that I'll get asked this quite a funny sort of question. So you'll be talking in the queue at the shops, and someone will say, Are you British? And I always say the same thing, which is, how can you tell? And so if I talk with my absolutely natural accent, people tend to think I'm Australian, and that happens a lot with people from London. Because the Cockney London accent is a lot of Australian English comes from people that were basically deported for pretty minor things and sent to Australia as a punishment, which, if you ask me, sounds like the wrong kind of punishment.
Yeah.
To go from a rainy shithole.
Hey, we're going to send you to where there are miles of beach.
Yeah.
And
No, not the beach.
No,
not the beach.
Don't throw me in the briar patch. Yeah.
And so, I think that maybe not necessarily memories, but certainly a familiarity and some sort of shared communion seems to happen when people recognize an accent.
Okay.
And my dad spent some time in Canada, and whenever he hears Canadian accents, he always tries to guess which one of the two. So there's like 2 major Canadian accents.
Okay.
And
separated east and west.
pretty much, Toronto. And so whenever he gets it right, the Canadian that he's interrogating,
the French Canadians,
of course, which is
if I have if I'm prejudiced, I hate French Canadians.
I was going to go to Montreal very soon.
Anyway,
in about a week's time, it was part of my plan to go over
sorry,
to
French
McGill.
Canadians, tweet me and beat me up or whatever.
I didn't say anything bad about you, French
did
Canadians.
Not. I am so annoyed. Anyway,
and I've noticed that the poor people that he's playing this guessing game with always enjoy it if he gets it right.
Oh.
And look pretty pissed off if he gets it wrong.
Oh.
So it's a dangerous game to play that. If you're not going to get it right, you could upset people.
Yeah. Well, Pete spent a lot of time out in the sandbox, as we like to say, in the Middle East, in the desert. And there are a lot of, there are tests that happen throughout one's day where they'll listen to how you say a particular word to get a cue for where is it you're from and what are you doing here? Yeah, what are you doing here? So
how did that work, Pete? Did they coach you in terms of voice dialect and accents?
No, that's all self-taught, and
okay.
You can, like your dad does, you can break a country down into a fairly small group of choices, and then within that, and this stuff, like, these people from this region say things this way, like Germans who speak German, like German, and they're very soft in their speaking, do not sound like Frankfurters. They're totally different. And so if you know those things, you can get close enough to the region, and they're usually pretty forgiving. You're like, are you from, there's something in there. You can always throw that as a qualifier. Are you from Bonn? And they'll say, oh, no, that's a good choice. And then they'll fix it for you, and they're still happy. So that
as long as you're close enough.
Yeah. And you've extended.
Yeah.
Right. Because there is something about caring and guessing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a nice way to engage someone without just going, the weather's pretty wet today or whatever, which is the classic British way of basically going quite. Someone and going,
we're queued up and I don't give a shit.
Yeah. Some British people would never talk in a queue, but I make a habit of doing it in the States because I like to have the interactions with people.
How often do you visit us over here?
I haven't been over for a couple of years. I think but the last time I came, I did a month in a Ford Mustang. So I started in Denver, Colorado, and then went down and ran down the Pacific Coast Highway. Across over to Utah. So I had a good trip.
Yeah.
And I do like it here, but I haven't been to the East. So I'm going to the East Coast, going to New York City on Monday. And I haven't been there for a few, I think.
Are you on sabbatical?
It sounds like a sabbatical, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I am working, I promise. So I've got a grant from the UK government, which is to go and talk to people like you guys. So I'm supposed to have 100 conversations in 3 months. About work, basically.
Interesting.
Which is a really weird, arbitrary number. I don't know which douchebag at the government.
In 3 months?
Yeah.
That's more than one per day.
Which is why something like NAMM's really good.
Yeah.
Because you can just go out there and clock up.
And pile them up.
10 a day and bash them out. But then I
Where are you headed?
So on Monday, New York, for about a week. I've got a friend coming over from Oxford, this musician friend, for a bit of that, and he's set me up with some folks from Spotify and a few other big. There's a rock star called Andrew WK, who I think we're going to have a chat with.
Okay.
I'm going to go to the Met Opera for a single man's birthday treat. So although I'm a metalhead, I also like all things in extremis. So I'm going to my favourite opera, which is Don Giovanni at the New York Met, on my birthday on February the 6th. Then after that, I think I haven't worked out the stuff in the middle. I need to talk to my lovely team back home, if she's listening, Jane Andrews, who's been booking all my flights and hotels for me, as an absolute hero. But basically, I'm ending up in South by Southwest.
Terrific.
So there's a kind of a gap. I'm going to Tokyo for February the 18th for a few days, probably Sydney, Singapore, Hong Kong, and then back over. But I really want to go to New Orleans. I've never been to New Orleans.
Oh, you should.
And so that's kind of really haunting me, and I'm desperately trying to. Sorry, Montreal, but you may lose out to New Orleans.
Fuck Montreal.
Yeah.
If you are able to make it down there.
Well, I mean, I can go more or less where I want.
Wherever you want.
Yeah. So it's a weird.
Well,
brand.
I'm saying if it works out that you make your way down there, and New Orleans is my favorite city.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's seriously, Montreal is, in all seriousness, Montreal
is the most American city.
Yeah,
and the most steeped in rich variety.
Cool
city. And I know Pete will back me up here. I strongly suggest you get down there. And if you find that you do have time and you are going to make it down there, please let me know.
Okay, we'll do. So New Orleans, and then I've got some friends in Nashville.
Another great place to talk with folks.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can start to see the dots getting joined.
Okay, I have a friend in Nashville.
All right.
And just if you're going to make it there,
cool.
You should meet him because he's a great guy, and he was at NAMM, and you'll have a great time with him.
Perfect. So I'm going to take you up on that.
Yeah, please.
Awesome.
Duncan, when you're on the road doing these interviews and talking to people, did you have to go through an ethics review board ahead of that, or is this less?
No, so there is a very strict ethics process when we're running experiments. So if we're going to strap you into my day-to-day job, which I guess I haven't actually told you guys about, involves putting sensors on people and then playing them sounds pretty much. So it could be music, could be noise, could be building sounds, and I work with building engineers, and so it's not just music really, and also with patients that have severe disabilities, and we monitor their brain and their heart and their sweat and these other kinds of sensors and try to figure out models of what's happening in their bodies.
That does sound very dastardly.
It is very dastardly, but we're not implanting thoughts, we're reading them out. So if you imagine you've got a patient that has no physical mobility, we try to use this technology so that they could, for example, enter notes into a sequencer and make music, or perhaps just choose music that suited their mood from their iTunes playlist, for example.
That makes it sound a lot less dastardly.
Yeah, so we have been approached twice by dastardly people to do things, but I've turned down that kind of funding both times. So I believe in, our whole lab believes in the power. I believe in the power of sound to help improve people's lives, to help motivate people, to help improve their work or their exercise or their sleep. And our whole lab is about using technology and AI to do good with. We try to, I think we have a moral duty to the taxpayer as well to do the right thing oftentimes. I've kind of gone off on a tangent there. I was going to tell you about something else before I started waffling about that. Can you remind me, or have I completely lost the thread?
Let's stay on this for a moment, because a very, very, very dear friend of the show actually announced it on the show, is our friend Phil, and he's got ALS, and so technology is going to become a very big part of his life as he loses the ability to control his muscles.
I'm afraid so. So we've done a lot of work with ALS. In 2015, I was part of a concert with 4 patients with extremely advanced ALS. So they were using this brain cap technology to pick notes from a sequencer and pass that to a string quartet in front of them. And they basically played a gig at the Royal Hospital for Neurodisability in London. That was the brainchild of my mentor, a composer, Eduardo Miranda, who wrote sequences of music for them. And I then built an algorithmic composition engine that used that same technology, so that you could use the brain cap and create constantly evolving music. So these patients are able to interact with each other as though they're playing a gig, and it was kind of a real moment where, watching it happen, we were all like bawling our eyes out at the end of it. I was a second supervisor for a PhD student a few years ago who came over to UCLA Medical School, which is the David Geffen School of Medical Science here, and we did a project which looked at how protein fibrillation processes happen in ALS. I guess for your listeners, ALS is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is one of the 6 or 7 motor neurone diseases. People often associate it with Stephen Hawking, a permanent disorder of consciousness, so you can't move.
Stephen Hawking and Lou Gehrig.
Yeah, of course, in America, Lou Gehrig's disease, it's called. Yeah, you're quite right. So the point about this technology is that you don't have to be able to move your body, your fingers, move a mouse. You can have active or passive brain-powered control for music or for sound selection, which is really cool.
It's just really figuring out a different way to create commands.
Exactly. So using brain data as a control signal. Yeah. So my current project, I'm working...
Did Duncan say I was quite right? Did you hear how he said
quite?
I did, quite right. Yeah. That's quite. So current project, I'm working with patients both in the NHS, which is our sort of free health service provider, and private hospitals in the UK. We've got patients again with ALS, that we're looking to build what we're calling a cognitive attention tracker. So for music therapy, so the idea being that the therapist would know when the patient is basically optimally ready to start the session. And then over time you can track that, and their carer can figure out, well, look, this therapy was working well, they were more kind of engaged with the process, or actually at this time there was a real slump, this isn't working, let's try and change things. Yeah. So this work is really one of the things that I'm most passionate about. I think it's really important. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to get funding for because there aren't a lot of people with ALS. And so one of the things that I try to do is to explain to people that you could use this technology for a wider audience. Yeah. So for example, if you imagine coming home and your Google Glass has one electrode on the back and it says, hey, Pete, John, you've had a rough day, the traffic's been shit, you were going to play some Johnny Cash. If you do play that, maybe we suggest you play this tune because we know that in the past that's elevated your alpha waves, it's made you more relaxed. Yeah, let's put that on for dinner time instead of putting this other tune that you were going to choose otherwise. Or rather than having to kind of, I don't know if this expression will make sense in the States, rather than having to dick around with an interface on your computer and choose the music, it just figures it out for you. And using AI adapts over time. Yeah. So this is an application that a huge audience might want to use.
Well, and the other thing about having ALS patients in the study is that it gives you an extreme where you have a learning environment that's a lot different. It's no different than really saying very few people have been to the moon.
Yeah.
But because we strived and we went to the moon, we all have microwave ovens.
Yeah, and a GPS.
Yeah, and GPS. So it's who knows what comes of it. It's one thing when you struggle to get funding for a project because few people have ALS. The benefits that come from a study in applying a discipline to an extreme example like that.
You're exactly right. And with all music-related things, we never really know what is going to happen when we bring a new bit of technology to the world. Sampling gave us hip-hop. Yep, more or less. Yeah. And I know you could do it with decks before, but really the sampler is the thing that did that. MIDI gave us all of that 80s synth pop and changed the face of... Auto-Tune changed pop music again. Yep. Pro Tools changed pop music again. And so we don't really know. And I think I remember now what Pete was asking about was about ethics in terms of this stuff. And the reason that the ALS patients have triggered my thinking about that is because one of the things you have to do when you work with ALS victims, really they are sufferers, is you have to be very, very careful about everything that you do because there's a medical expression which is prima non nocere. Firstly, don't make it worse. And with somebody that can't speak or it takes a long time to get a reaction from, you need to be really careful that you're not fucking their life up.
Wow.
And so there's huge ethical procedures in place for all of that stuff.
And sensitivities.
And data protection. And so, but for walking around and talking to people about research, there's no ethical concerns at all. I haven't had to do any forms. I'm just sort of bouncing around, getting into trouble, basically, which has been great fun.
Yeah. Well, we're glad to be part of that trouble. I'm going to button up because I got to get you on a boat.
Yeah, man, I'm sorry about this bit of a rush. I've loved talking to you guys.
This has been an amazing conversation, though, and one that I hope goes on for a long, long time over many, many occasions.
We didn't even get to talk about the dominatrix.
Yes.
But we can do that next time.
We have failed. But we have a reason for part 2.
But I'll give your listeners a tease. I did get the interview with the dominatrix.
Oh, so one
I
of
even
the
got
people,
a card.
Oh, there's a card.
Oh. It's got a blade on it.
I think it's a penis.
It's a penis.
Look, I want to show.
It's got a penis hole.
Yes, that's right.
So we call that a glory hole in Europe.
That is terrific. Dominatrix Carmen. Okay.
So shout out to her.
Shout out to Dominatrix Carmen. This has been our conversation with Duncan Williams, hopefully the first of very many. Duncan, your work is fascinating, and you're a great and fascinating dude.
Thank you very much for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. And thank you for this lovely beer. That's helped wash away the taste of the morning big time. So much appreciated.
Duncan Williams, everybody.